Today we're talking with Rhiannon Tracey, motivational speaker, wellness advocate, model, lifestyle influencer, Young Australian of the Year, dog and chicken mama. Rhiannon's based in Melbourne, and today we talk about life after spinal cord injury, dating and relationships, and finding meaning and purpose. She's a wonderful company, so let's get into the chat.
Welcome to A Really Good Sex Chat, a podcast aiming to open up conversations about disability and sexuality. I'm your host, Candice Care-Unger, psychosexual therapist and specialist social worker at Care Rehab. Join us as we have frank conversations about sexuality, disability, fertility, pleasure, dating, and everything in between. This podcast is brought to you by Care Rehab and recorded on Worimi country.
So, a very warm welcome to Rhiannon Tracey to A Really Good Sex Chat. For those who have heard our previous episode about 2.5 years ago on A Stream of Continence, we talked about sex and disability and spinal cord injury, particularly back then. But today, we're catching up. We're going to talk about dating. We're going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about whatever else comes to our mind, because that's just how we roll. And for those who maybe haven't heard your other podcasts before or haven't come across your work yet, which I'm sure is not many people, but would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Rhiannon Tracey, and I'm the founder and executive director of a facility here in Melbourne called The Next Step Recovery and Wellness Centre. I established it 11 years ago after having a spinal cord injury myself back in 2009. So coming up to 16 years next month, which is wild. I do live my life on wheels. I'm an incomplete quadriplegic and I do lots of things. I wear lots of hats, but the things that I love most are my facility and our community and all of my animals. I'm animal mad. I have 2 chickens, 2 dogs, 2 cats. I want cows. I want everything. And I'm a Scorpio and I'm neurodivergent. So I'm just a gift that keeps on giving.
Start with next steps for a second. Like, obviously having your own injury and wanting to focus on your own recovery is part of it. But what made you decide to go that next step, literally? Oh, that's a bit of a pun.
Didn't think of that at all when we gave it the name.
I'm just having the light bulb moment right now. What's the story there, like in terms of transitioning just from your own rehab into sort of a development of community?
Just the lack of having options to recover from an injury like this. So I was 20 when I had my injury and I just wanted to walk again. Like, honestly, that was my goal initially. And I think that for a lot of us who have sustained these injuries, that is something that we envision. And I think as time rolls on, there's another pun, you start to live, not just survive and not just, focus on walking. We looked for options firstly within Australia and couldn't find any. We wanted to be around a community of people who encouraged recovery because it can be looked upon in a negative light when you have an injury like this. And the only the means to the end that we found was flying across the world to a facility in San Diego. So obviously financially, that was just impossible to continue to do. Even to get there, the first time we had to fundraise. I had my injury in Bali, so I had no compensation. We're talking pre-NDIS days. And, it was a lot. And we met a lot of families over there from Australia who were doing the exact same thing. So there was a lot of conversations with a lot of different people who were on a similar journey, different goals, but all aligned with the need and want to become independent again, I guess, overall. We did build a community by having those conversations, both overseas Aussies and then Aussies back home. And we had established enough people and enough resources to kind of just say, well, why? Like, why doesn't this exist here? I do understand now why it didn't exist. It's been a lot, but it's something that I'm incredibly proud of. And I truly believe that it's turned my pain into purpose because it was not only a need for me in the early stages of my injury to have somewhere where I could go for my recovery, but I needed a job. I needed a job. I needed a community and a support system. I couldn't return to the work that I was doing prior to having my injury. I was a vet nurse. So I needed something. And while there was a lot of sacrifices made for the next step to happen and to survive those kind of pre-NDIS years, I'm very, very grateful and I'm very proud. I feel like especially in the last 12 months, it's been the first kind of time in its inception that I can kind of sit back and go, wow, like what it's doing in this community is incredible. And what I get to say happened because of the shitty situation that was my accident has happened. So I've built a family that I never had. I'm an only child. So, I've got the brothers I never had, never wanted in my senior managers. It's really become a second home for me and a second home for many.
Tell me the story of Bali. You were just saying you were injured in Bali pre-NDIS as well. So you were holidaying? Is that your injury story?
Yeah. So I used to go to Bali every year with my mum. Like I said, I'm an only child. So I have an interesting relationship with my mum. I used to say I have a love-hate relationship, but I don't say that anymore because I absolutely adore her. But it's an interesting relationship, we'll say that. So we used to go to Bali every year and we would alternate. One year she'd bring a friend, the next year I'd bring a friend. And I loved going to Bali for so many different reasons. One of the main reasons I loved going over there was because I'd rescue all the animals. I would have all the cats in my bungalow. I would love it. But I loved the culture, and it really was a place of peace for me. And it was an interesting time leading up to the holiday because it's funny when I have conversations about trusting your gut and when the universe gives you signs and things like that now, it's very, very different to where I was at as a 20-year-old. But a lot of things happened leading up to this particular trip to Bali that when I look back now, I think something was meant to happen. Something was meant to happen. Long story short, I dove into a resort swimming pool that said it was deep, but it wasn't. And I broke my neck and my back. And it was 2 months before my 21st birthday. My best friend at the time pulled me out of the swimming pool, and I spent 3 weeks in the hospital over there. The night I had my accident, while I was waiting for emergency surgery, Bali had an earthquake. So that
Whoa.
postponed surgery. That ruffled a lot of things.
Have a natural disaster in amongst your injury. Far out. Yeah, okay.
I mean, something was meant to happen, and I think looking back at it in those early days, when you experience any kind of trauma, you go, why? Why did this happen? And when Mum and I talk about it now, we kind of think, well, if I didn't have the accident that night, maybe we would have still been out. We would have been injured in the earthquake. Who knows, but something was going to happen, and it did. Yeah, I spent 3 weeks in the medical system over there, and that was an experience within itself. That's where I'll say that I'm lucky to be alive, not even surviving the injury, but surviving the medical care over in Indonesia. I was operated on, and then I needed 3 surgeries when I finally got back to Australia. So 3 weeks later, I had travel insurance, best, I think $120 I've ever spent in my life.
Yeah.
And then I spent a further 7 to 8 months going through the Victorian spinal unit down here in Melbourne.
This is a slight tangent for a second, but I was on the World Health Organization's working committee for lower middle income countries for their package of rehabilitation care. And I assume Indonesia would fall into the lower middle income country kind of bracket. And, for many people, quadriplegia is people don't survive it. And exactly what you're saying, it's the technology, the resources, the healthcare is just not there to be able to do what happens in Australia.
And that's exactly what it came down to. They just did not have the resources. They wanted to help. They wanted to do all of the things that they could do, but they just didn't have the resources. And unfortunately, because of the earthquake, there was a lot going on over there when I needed to come back to Australia, but I kind of wasn't at the top of the priority list. So yeah, it was a journey.
But you're meant to be here, so you managed to find your way back, and that's cool. When you were talking before about going back to San Diego and doing all of those international rehab trip, that was about the time I was working in the spinal unit in Brisbane. So it was 2008, 2007, I was on the wards, and people were remortgaging their homes to go to the US. The health professionals were sort of what are we doing? We're setting people up to just have a lifetime worth of debt. Should we be doing something more here so people don't need to go there? What are the bells and whistles and rainbows and unicorns that are happening in the US that make it so attractive? And I remember chatting to a guy who'd come back, and I'm like, was it worth it? And the things that he took from it was I can travel overseas by myself. I can drive a car in another country. His balance had improved, but he wasn't walking. But all of the kind of confidence to live one's life again had come from that trip. So he was like, yeah, it's still worth it. Even though I didn't meet my rehab goal, I still have seen a pathway forward and a life that's worth living that includes international travel. And
it really was the community within this facility that was the change-making factor. And every time we'd come home, so we went over there on 3 separate occasions and fundraised each time. I was very lucky to have an amazing community of support behind me. But every time we would come back, people would ask, what's different over there versus, rehabilitation here? And I said, the hope and the passion of the team that are working with you. They don't take no for an answer. They don't focus on what the textbooks say, and they genuinely show up to work because they want to help you improve your life. Like, we're talking people who had jobs before their job so that they could make means to an end by being able to show up at this particular facility. This was their passion, and that's what made it very, very different. But I've learned that that's something that you can instill in people as well. When you've got the right people behind you, that's quite easy to replicate.
Yeah. And hope is such an interesting thing. One of my colleagues kind of talked about hope for recovery and hope for a cure, and then hope for quality of life and sort of the trajectory of hope and how that moves along. So that was a very formative part of my social work early days. And I had a doctor sit me down on my very first day. She says, "We never say never, Candice." And I'm like, okay, noted, never say never. And I think that was a very important conversation for me to have because, there was others who were like, it's false hope. And to have a doctor sit me down saying, never say never. You don't have a crystal ball. I don't have a crystal ball. I think it was a nice kind of way to set me up as a rehab social worker.
It's funny that you say that because I just found a new GP, and I said to my partner and my mum the other day that in the 16 years that I've had my injury, this is the first GP who really and truly believes in hope and hasn't been a negative Nancy or has just been genuinely excited about the fact, like, she was just gobsmacked that she was meeting a quadriplegic who could drive a car and owns a business and does all these things. She was like, sorry, what level are you? What do you do? And when I told her about, the things that we were doing, like, she was on her computer while I was in there looking up the next step. And she was just so informative. And she actually taught me more about my ADHD than any psychiatrist has that I've seen, and then knew about, spinal cord injury as well. So yeah, there are a dime a dozen, those people that say never.
Yep. And hopefully they get us early in our careers. So that way we then start saying never say never. Okay, let's chat about 20-year-old you gets back to Australia. At what point do you get back into the dating scene? Can we chat about that for a bit?
For me, getting back into the dating world with this injury didn't really happen until like 2018. So I was about to turn 30. The last time I had dated was when I was like 15. So it was very, very interesting. It was so scary, but I mean, I wouldn't change it. Like, something that I always say to people about having an injury like this is it gives you the biggest superpower of a bullshit filter. I didn't get to experience the 20s, like being 20 and being single and flirty and fun.
Yeah.
So that's what I was experiencing, and I experienced it well. I met lots of interesting human beings. I loved it. I actually love dating. I was at a point in my life where, like I said, I just turned 30. I'd come out of a marriage. I had a little bit of money in the bank. So, I got the Botox, I got the fillers, I got the hair extensions. I felt hot and I loved dating. Like, I really did. Our single years can be the best years of our lives if we let them. I did have the anxiety about going to meet people, when I was in the chair, even though I knew that they knew that I was in the chair. I always felt a bit conscious, but I quickly learned that it became more of a me problem than a them problem. And I think that as a woman with a disability is something that you actually grow through. The first few times for anyone, like, let's be honest, dating is scary whether you have a disability or not. I think
Absolutely.
The scariest part about dating with a disability is probably the safety component.
Yeah, okay. I've got a few people who don't want to get into it for fear of being rejected. And I'm just like, mate, everyone gets rejected. Like, it's just part of being in the game.
I couldn't agree more. And I've been rejected and I've rejected, But I think when you do get to the point of meeting someone, I think for me, I had filtered out enough of the garbage to know whether they were worth meeting. The shitty people aren't going to be the ones who are matching with you.
So what was your filter for getting rid of the deadbeats?
Anything that was unsolicited.
Yep, okay.
Straight away. I think that is the biggest common occurrence when it comes to online dating. the way that people approached asking me about what had happened and how soon they did it. I did find that there were a few conversations where I brought it up. I actually remember somebody I did end up going on a date with and even hooking up with. We had probably a week of talking online, had progressed to talking on the phone, and had not once brought up my injury. He had not brought it up at all. And I was like, oh, that's really strange. Like,
Because you had signposted in your photos, like it was kind of obvious.
in my little bio, so it's like lives my life on hot pink wheels, yada, yada, yada. And so I found it very strange that he hadn't brought it up. And again, this comes back to it becoming more of a me problem, because I was like, all right, well, how do I bring it up? Like, how do I bring it up? And I remember saying to him, I'm like, I have to just address the elephant in the room. Like, you know that I have a disability, right? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, but you haven't asked me about it. And his response was, well, I just figured if you wanted to talk about it, you would have brought it up. So I think we can catastrophize the situation a little bit as well. And that's what I mean when I say, like, you grow through the rejection. Like, you've got to have some rejection to build the confidence, to be able to have enough self-confidence to put yourself back out there. It's a process.
And also it's about like finding compatibility too. The chances of finding someone you're compatible with on your first shot.
Not lowering your standards for anything or anyone.
What about like the ADHD diagnosis? Was that post-injury or pre-injury?
It was post. So I was one of those girls in their 30s or women in their 30s who got diagnosed with it during COVID. But I reckon if I had have gone to a psychiatrist in my teens, they would have absolutely diagnosed me then. I'm 36 years old. My mum is in that generation of parents, and I say this very open and honestly, who just don't really believe it's a thing. Just kind of, oh yeah, I guess you weren't a great student. Oh yeah. I'm like, well, this is why. Like, remember how I struggled? Like, remember this and this? And she's like, oh yeah. Even to this day, she's like, but do you have it? And my partner's like, his daughter has it as well. And her and I are like the exact same person. Like, she's like a mini me and she's his daughter. So I got diagnosed when I was 32. I was very, very open to managing it with medication, which was interesting to some of my people because I don't even take Panadol for a headache. I'm very realistic. But I was at the point where I knew that I was struggling and I had so many responsibilities that I was like, something has got to give. So I did. I tried the medications. Mentally, they were brilliant, but I had a lot of side effects because of my neurogenic bowels. I ended up with a lot of continence issues. And that honestly is the only reason why I'm not medicated to this day. If I could take a medication that didn't wreak havoc on my spinal cord injured body, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Oh, and we have an enormous amount of ADHD within the spinal community. Often how people have acquired their injury too. Like, it's a contributing factor. But in terms of dating and ADHD, do you think there's any kind of dating experiences that you kind of go, oh yeah, that was challenging, or that was probably ADHD?
Not really with ADHD, more just being into the wrong type of person and generational trauma.
Learning how to pick them. All right.
No, I don't think my ADHD played a part in it at all. I actually remember like telling a couple of the people that I was talking to that I had ADHD, and they said, who doesn't?
Yeah, no, I wasn't sure if you were kind of more like there's a few people I've been chatting to lately just kind of talking about, getting bored in relationships really easily, maybe like being a bit of a shit partner because of the boredom or...
Nah, for me, that was just all generational trauma stuff and work that I needed to do outside of the neurodivergent brain.
Fair enough. All right, so you were saying before we started recording that you just got back from Bali and you decided to return after how many years? How long has it been since you were there?
Well, I have been back. I went back just before we opened the next step. So 12 years since I last went back. Very, very different experience this time. It was literally the first time I've ever been to Bali without my mum.
Okay.
So I was a bit nervous. I didn't tell her I was nervous because I knew she was nervous, and I knew if we both told each other we were nervous, I probably wouldn't have gone.
Yeah, okay.
But I was excited. When I went back in 2012, the memory that I had was that it was just really, really hard to get around. So I don't remember, like, I didn't enjoy the experience. I actually went back to film a Channel 9 TV show called What Really Happens in Bali, and they did a feature on my accident. So, the whole time I was over there, it was about going back to the swimming pool and going back to the hospital with a camera in my face from the day we started. And it was awful. Like, it was horrible. Don't know whose idea it was to be a part of that, but I remember going, like, we went back to the swimming pool and it was super chill. I didn't really have any emotions, but like I said earlier, it was going back to the hospital that made me realize that I was very lucky to be alive. So this time around, I didn't do the hospital, I did the swimming pool because I didn't have the experience last time around the pool that I wanted to have. And I also wanted to go back because I wanted to, not because I had to, because in the first 5 years of having my injury, all my Bali people would ask me, are you going to go back to Bali? And I was like, no, I hate Bali. Like, this is all Bali's fault. It wasn't Bali's fault at all. So going back was something that I felt like I had to do. So this time around, I actually got a bit of Bali FOMO, if I'm being entirely honest, because I was watching so many people go to Bali and post like really beautiful stuff. And I was like, maybe. Ben and I were sitting on the couch one day and I said, do you want to go to Bali? And he had never been. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, all right.
And off we go.
Then we booked the flights and off we went. It was interesting. Like, it was an interesting time. I got quite emotional when we got off the plane because I could smell the Bali smells, all the incense, and could hear all the music. Yeah, I got quite emotional. I got a bit teary-eyed. Absolutely loved it. Like, the first week we stayed in a hotel, we stayed in a completely different area to where I had my injury.
So you're like making new memories rather than trying to go back on old memories. Yeah.
Yeah. And we did the whole just laying on the beach thing and everything like that. And then it was my job to show everyone where, like, all the things
you're a tour guide.
Because the night I had my accident, we'd actually been on a cruise. So I said, oh, why don't we do the cruise? We had to navigate the accessibility side of things. And the thing about Bali is, even if it's not accessible, they will do anything they need to do to help you with accessibility. So even going on the cruise meant that my chair had to be lifted in and out of the boat and yada, yada. We made it work. It was a beautiful experience doing the cruise. And then a few days after that, we went back to the swimming pool. And the goal was to get back in the swimming pool and have a swim. The pool was closed for maintenance. So we had dinner by the pool instead. And that was beautiful. We got to see fire twirlers and yada, yada, yada. And then we went across the road to a drag bar and got really drunk. I think I just wanted to fall back in love with Bali in the way that I remembered it before I had my accident, because I did have some hostility towards it. Like I said, when I went back in 2012, it was all about, just being able to manage getting around. And there was really nothing enjoyable about it. So when I left, I was like, I don't need to go back. Like, I'm done. I've closed that chapter. Whereas as I've got older, I've been on this healing journey from a lot of things, not just my accident. I'm just kind of like, there's true beauty in falling in love with the things that you loved before and you forget about as you get older. I find a real beauty, like I said, in falling back in love with the things that used to make you happy.
So you're going back to romance Bali as opposed to, have some healing moment beside the pool.
Absolutely. And I did. I feel like a part of me did heal from going back to the pool this time. I mean, my job is to talk about my accident. I talk about the exact moment. I was fully conscious when I had my accident. But when I looked at the swimming pool, I actually had a moment where I was like, why did you decide to dive at that particular point? That thought actually ran through my head and my heart for about 30 seconds. And my partner has a really beautiful way of knowing that he's so in tune with me. He knows more about me than I know about myself. I think he could tell that something wasn't right. And, he said, you all right? And I just said, I'm just thinking, I had a swimming pool in my backyard growing up that I used to dive in all the time. So things just happen. I was 20, I was on holiday. Things just happen.
It's kind of nice to hear you talk this story about, returning, not feeling particularly distressed at all, actually, just sort of saying that person is not me anymore, really. Like, that person has grown, that person has changed, that person deserves a lot of compassion. And by what you were saying before, like, you've kind of turned your pain into absolute purpose and a bit of a powerhouse these days. So sometimes, good things come through bad experiences. And I run this like family resilience group, and this idea of like something good coming out of the injury is incredibly controversial. So you got to be gentle about how you introduce that idea. This idea that something good has come through adversity is kind of loaded in positive psychology. And for people who can see purpose, then that's incredibly helpful for long-term adjustment and perspective. I mean, you're happily settled in a relationship now, so that's congratulations on that.
We're a month away from being 12 months in, and I'm just like, where did that time go? But we keep saying to each other, like, time really flies when you're having fun, because this relationship is so different. A lot of people have watched the breakdowns of multiple relationships for me, and my last one was quite a significant turning point for me, because I was the one who initiated leaving the relationship, and it was the start of an entirely different healing journey that led me to the person that I'm with now. And it's interesting because I often talk amongst my friends about the fact that growing up, I remember people used to say to me, like, not fighting with your partner or not having an argument is unhealthy. And I'm not a fighter. I'm not somebody who argues. But in every relationship that I've been in, there's either been, verbal abuse, physical abuse, stonewalling. But with Ben, we have never fought. All we've got to do, like, if we're pissy, is just like frown, and we say, like, stop yelling at me with your face, because we don't argue.
And I think learning communication skills, learning how to be in a secure relationship, learning how to ask for your needs and be willing to say no to somebody else's request. They're not necessarily things that we innately know how to do. I mean, this is what psychosexual therapy often is. For many people, exploring patterns in relationships and also anxieties around sex and dating and relationships, and then recognizing, well, why am I doing that particular thing, or why have I accepted this particular thing, particularly after an injury where maybe people have lowered expectations of other people, or there's fear of not being in a relationship, therefore they settle for something that's not healthy. I mean, that's exactly the work. So well done you for going and investing the time, energy, and emotional resources in growing, because many people just put their head in the sand and say, oh my God, it's too hard.
A huge component of why I have stayed in toxic relationships is because I had this feeling of worthlessness. And, I married somebody who had borderline personality disorder, who I dated throughout high school. And when we rekindled after my injury, I remember him telling me, I have this. And I went, "Oh, that's nothing in comparison to a spinal cord injury." There was always this kind of comparison for me. I was like, oh, I'm worth a little bit less because of my disability. And that's why I talk about growing through it, because it does take time. And it was realizing my value, because in my last relationship, people would actually say to me, you do more than what most able-bodied people do in their lives. I'm very, very grateful. I have a village of people around me who will pull me into line. People would say that. They're like, you do more. You do more. You should be overvaluing yourself. And that's what I started to do. When I met Ben, I was like, absolutely, I'm not interested in anybody. And it just ended up very organically, and it continues to flow organically. And I truly believe, like, well, I don't believe, I know he loves me because of that. He's like, you know exactly what you want. And in the first 6 months of our relationship, I felt like a bitch, because I am so like, no, I don't want that. And no, that's not, and I'm like, I'm horrible. And Ben's like, no, you're not. You're setting your boundaries, So it's a very interesting experience, one that we all have to go through at some point.
What do you think was the turning point to say, I'm no longer a burden in my relationships? I'm actually very valuable. I'm inherently worthy just by being me.
Looking around and analyzing my space and my people, because I thought to myself, if I am worthless, why have I got all of these people that depend on me? I was showing up in so many aspects of my life in different ways that I was like, well, if I'm worthless, I'd have nobody.
So like, from a CBT point of view, it was sort of like, let's put my thoughts on trial. Where's the evidence that this thought is true? Oh, look, there is no evidence. I do this with my daughter when she has like an anxious thought, or like it's an untrue cognitive kind of belief. Like, where's the evidence of that? and we write it on the whiteboard. Now, where's the evidence of it being untrue?
My psychologist does that with me all the time.
Okay, so lots of like challenging beliefs and kind of looking for where's that thought come from and realizing when it's not true.
Exactly.
Okay, so the moral of this episode is come to therapy.
Oh my God. I stand by those who don't go to therapy are the reason we who go to therapy need therapists. Absolutely. I would have that tattooed across my forehead if I could.
Come on, family, come to therapy too.
But I also am finding too, and I don't want to scare anyone away who is considering therapy, the more therapy I do, the more that is coming up. Like I'm going through something at the moment where I'm seeing relationships with family members very, very different now because of the therapy that I've been doing. And I say to Ben all the time, I'm like, the more therapy I have, the more therapy I need. I love it.
And I think sometimes the conversation I've had with couples when they've come in and then one hasn't been ready and the other one's ready is that when one does lots of therapy, they can kind of outgrow each other very quickly. Like the therapy can be unsettling. And that's not always a bad thing, but it will disrupt your relationships. And
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, we've covered a number of things today. Thank you so much.
I think we've covered quite a lot. I just love chatting with you.
I know, I love chatting with you too. Thank you for being with us today and sharing your story. You're always so generous with sharing your personal story. And I know that that's what you kind of do for work as well. So if people wanted to find you, follow you, how are they best to do that?
At Rhiannon Tracey, my real life across all socials. Prepared to be spammed by all the pet spam, but I do share a lot. And I share with transparency and honesty as well. So I'm not an influencer by any means, but I share experiences because I know when I've gone through things, I've needed somebody like me that I can reach out to. So that's kind of how I established my presence in the wild world of social media.
Good on you. And you do public speaking as well. And if people were looking for a speaker, what's your favorite type of events that you like to speak at?
I don't have a favorite. I just love speaking. I love to do it all. I think the reason why I became a speaker, and I became a speaker before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I get a huge dopamine rush when I talk with audiences, and I'm a very different speaker than what people probably think they're going to get when they're booking a keynote speaker. So being neurodivergent, having ADHD, I'm very engaging. I need to engage when I'm speaking. So I'm asking my audience questions as well. I really and truly love speaking. So it doesn't matter the audience. I started speaking to youth from primary school to high school. And now I speak to major corporations and huge industries. So I don't have a favorite. I do it all.
Well, thank you so much again for your time today and lovely to see you as always. And until next time, take care of yourself.
You too. Thank you, lovely.
Massive thanks to Rhiannon for her time today. If you want to find Rhiannon's work, check out rhiannontracey.com.au or the nextstepsci.org.au. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend and rating the podcast on Spotify so that others can find it too. Thank you for joining us on A Really Good Sex Chat, and I'll catch you next time.